The topic we're discussing here is data breaches, and you've probably heard this term before, especially if you're at all interested in security, especially information security. And data breaches are the event where a certain portion of data stored by a particular entity is compromised, or essentially, since data can be copied, somebody accessed it without authorization and copied data and either exposed it or has just somehow kept it for themselves. And this usually means that somebody has found out about it, and that's usually known as a data breach. Because the sad fact is that there's often a lot of data exposure, meaning that somebody is seeing data that they aren't supposed to, or just data is available widely compared to what it's supposed to be by design, because either of poor security design or a vulnerability that has never been remediated. And sometimes, in fact, very often, some researchers suspect there is more data exposure than we are aware of, and there are a lot of essentially active data breaches every day which don't get reported because nobody is aware of them. And so when we are talking about data breaches, there's often a delay in reporting, and sometimes it's because the company that is the victim of the data breach doesn't want to discuss it publicly until they've done a thorough investigation or until they've been able to do damage control. And sometimes this is because actually detecting a data breach is hard because nothing physical is actually stolen. No data gets destroyed or deleted. It's just that a copy is made of data, either suppose customer records, patient records, financial records, passwords, social security numbers, essentially a lot of data that's supposed to be stored securely and is not supposed to be widely shared. And as a result, there are often large collections of this kind of breach-based data that is available for sale on the internet or through other black market means where somebody might be trying to make a profit on exposed private information. And the uses for that information can be different. Somebody might be buying a list of email addresses to send spam to. Somebody might be trying to get private data so they can build better marketing. Somebody might just be trying to get an access to credit card numbers and try to use them online before they are deactivated, especially if there is a delay between when something is reported as breached or exposed and when a actual breach happens and how long that information might be floating around on illegal channels. And so there's a lot of downstream effects to a data breach, and those downstream effects are usually in the form of damage to the owners of the data. So for example, there is a credit card that you've been using on 5 different websites, and one of those websites now isn't secure anymore and has suffered a data breach, and now the credit card information is out there. And so when you try to use that information on the other websites, you might see that you've run out of credit limit because somebody else has been using it illegally, and you might not have been monitoring your credit limits and not getting alerts, and you might not have received any kind of communication from the website that got breached. And so now you are suddenly in a position where you aren't able to buy stuff either physically or online because of this situation. Or another situation is now you have to spend a lot of your time disputing transactions with the credit card company or the bank because there has been a breach and your card has been used in an unauthorized fashion. Or it might even be that you're the victim of identity theft, where somebody is using a combination of your financial and personal data, like your date of birth and your address and your social security number and other restricted numbers, in order to open a new credit file or create a new bank account in your name and use it illegally. And there are downstream effects for the company as well, and often those downstream effects are negative publicity, financial results like fines, and perhaps even sometimes there are sentences for the senior executives of a company if they were not careful about reporting the breach, or if it is found out that they were not using the proper methods for information security of the data to start with, or if it gets exposed that the company was storing data that it is illegal to store, depending on what country you are in and what jurisdiction you are in. So these are all possible effects of a data breach. And what are some of the things that we can do in order to avoid data breaches? Well, we need to have a solid data retention policy. And what that means is when we are collecting data from users, we need to be careful about how long we're keeping it in an accessible format before, for example, we encrypt it and put it away into long-term storage, into physical storage mediums that are off-site and not accessible through even our own systems directly. We need to have better intrusion detection so that when somebody does illegally access our system, even if we're not able to prevent that from happening in the first place, we have an easier time telling when somebody is looking at data that they shouldn't be. And that means having more audit trails, more monitoring, more logging, all the things that we've talked about in the course. And another aspect is encryption. Encryption, of course, can be such a big topic on its own. It really could be a course on its own, because encryption is at the intersection of just cybersecurity, information security practices, and mathematics and science, because the knowledge that's involved with writing a great encryption algorithm can be so specific and is part of such a high-level academic world. And at the same time, you also need to be a pretty good software engineer to build a unbeatable encryption algorithm. Encryption gets broken all the time, but encryption is important in this scenario because we want to be able to at least have a barrier between data being exposed and data being freely used by those who stole it. Because if they steal encrypted data, and then they don't have a way to crack that encryption and a way to turn the data back into plain text, then the value of the data starts to become limited. It's not completely worthless, because sometimes people will use compromised data that's encrypted to study what the products of encryption algorithm look like, and trying to guess at what a original data point was and how it looks encrypted, and trying to reverse engineer the encryption that way. But its commercial viability definitely is much lower, and as a result, hackers are less likely to steal data or try to get at data if they know it's encrypted. And the most important thing I would say in data breaches is to have a clear communication plan. So if a data breach happens, the company that it happens to, or the organization that it happens to, needs to have a strategy around how they're going to communicate to their users and to the organizations that are authorities for their industry. And they need to know how the process will work around either getting users to update their data where appropriate, or just being able to pay financial damages and fines when needed, and just overall avoid a situation where they're liable criminally or just in terms of publicity and image for data that got exposed. And that's why actually a good strategy is to try to only collect that data which is necessary, and not try to collect and retain too much data. For example, when it comes to something like payment processing, if your company doesn't want to store their own credit card information, and we still want to have a user be able to pay for something, we can use a third-party service. And then that third-party service is responsible for getting the user's credit card data and having a way to authorize it and a way to hold on to it for things like refunds and chargebacks. And we don't ever have to see the credit card number. It doesn't end up in our systems. That's definitely one way to avoid ever having that credit card information then be exposed from our systems.